done stepped in the game? At point blank range, who done stepped in the game? At point blank range, who done stepped in the game? Stepped in the game, stepped in the game.
Good evening. First of all, I'd like to give a disclaimer. ShadowCasts are coming, but this video response needed to happen, so this is going to happen.
I think a Switch Mini is a step backwards. I think a more powerful Switch should be a priority, and that's the tweet I made, and a lot of people do agree with me, but a lot of people disagree, and that's kind of what I want to touch on in this video. So I got a lot of discussions about kind of how financially better it would be to get a Switch Mini first instead of a Switch Pro, which I agree, a Switch Mini would probably be cheaper, but there's so much sacrifices to the already weak Switch that I don't really think that Nintendo should be even thinking about a mini version. Now, my thing is, they should have done a Pro Edition first and the base Switch be kind of the mini alternative. It won't exactly be a mini version, like with the Joy-Cons stuck on them or anything, but it would be somewhat cheaper and it would have at least some power where the games don't look wonky and just not right. And I also know that smaller doesn't mean necessarily less powerful, but the Switch Mini, people are saying that it's going to be less powerful and it's not going to have the functions of the original Switch, which, yeah, duh, it's gonna be cheaper, there's gonna have to be sacrifices. And that's where I'm like, they couldn't wait for a Pro to come out, because, okay, they did this with the 3DS, they had the original 3DS, and they had the 3DS new version, which is powerful than the original 3DS, and they're about the same size. And same with the 2DS or the new 2DS. That one's actually kind of smaller. So a smaller console does not automatically mean it's less powerful, but given from what the news we've been receiving about it, I think it's going to sacrifice a lot for a price point that is basically not going to be as big as people think.
So this is kind of confusing because in the same breath, we hear the statement that just because it's smaller doesn't mean it's weaker. Then we go about, well, I'm hearing people saying, being rumors at this point, I'm hearing people saying that it's going to be weaker or not have the same features as the base Switch. And then say, well, it's going to be weaker. You're confusing the two. Either smaller means it's going to be weaker, or smaller doesn't guarantee that it's going to be weaker. I'm going to go ahead and tell you that smaller doesn't always mean it's going to be weaker. I mean, just look at what your current phone can do right now versus what consoles could do a couple of years ago. Like, for the most part, this is a very positive channel. I'm not going to try to attack or do anything crazy here. I just really think this discussion needs to be had because at this point, she's being dismissive, and everything regarding her point doesn't even hold water, and everything that is suggested against her point she just completely dismisses and doesn't even try to acknowledge why it would be I guess logical to assert the opposite of her stance. So we'll continue.
The Switch is already portable. I don't understand why you need a more smaller Switch. The screen is already small. The Joy-Cons are tiny as heck. The Switch is not that big at all. And I've taken it many places. I put it in my purse. And if the Switch Mini is going to be less powerful, why would you want a smaller Switch when you could just take yours on the go and it's a little bit bigger?
Okay, so in this case here, we're assuming that there's going to be a mini Switch and that the mini Switch is going to be somehow less powerful than the base Switch that we have right now. I'm not sure what rumors are being read here. Everything that I've read basically says it's just going to be a Switch without the detachable controllers and possibly with a smaller screen. So it could be a little more portable than the current Switch is. Switch is currently portable, very portable, without the Joy-Con attached. It can fit in just about every pocket. When you attach the Joy-Con, that's what makes it not as portable. So the idea of making one of these guys with a smaller bezel, potentially smaller screen with a wider aspect ratio, say 16:10 instead of 16:9, and then having a smaller set of controllers, so it looks a little bit closer to, say, maybe a 3DS format or the original GBA format, as far as the height of the screen, then possibly yes, that would be more portable. But what she's suggesting here is that it's just gonna be a smaller Switch that somehow is gonna be drastically weaker with regards to performance. And why Nintendo would do that, as in it would cost them more money to take bend parts and put in a lesser performing Switch, and then have a completely different SDK for that lesser performing Switch, and then give that out to other people. That doesn't sound like that's something that they would do, because Nintendo likes to reuse stuff they've already bought, not create brand new stuff that's way weaker, that's gonna be another cost. That's a whole nother development pipeline for a whole nother processor that's different than the one that's currently on the market right now. So that doesn't add up to me. And in the use case of saying that people that have a Switch, why would they buy a second Switch to begin with, let alone a smaller one? Those are niche collectors such as myself, because I buy everything at launch. Not necessarily average Joe Schmo. What happens is the person that wanted a Switch originally sees the Switch Mini for $100 cheaper or what have you, and then they go buy that, regardless of what differences there are with the hardware. The same is true of the 3DS. You mentioned the 3DS and talked about how it had the same capabilities and everything, and Nintendo didn't skimp on that by making a newer one, but you chose to completely ignore the 2DS, which was obviously made and catered for a younger audience and a budget, and they took out a whole bunch of features that were in the original 3DS to include 3D altogether, completely gone. The chipsets are different, and all kind of things have been changed. The SD card, the manufacturers for all that type of stuff changed to make it completely cheaper. And that was the whole point. And then they made more money off of those rolling off of shelves. And, that's the way Nintendo does business. And this is just, it's bewildering to me, because Nintendo is one of the oldest first party companies out there. They've been doing this for the better part of 35 years. And they've never been in a situation where they weren't going to do that. If they release some hardware, if they come out with the phone, please believe you're going to see another phone that looks just like it with the same chipset inside of it that they rearranged and made cheaper somehow, because that's how they maximize on their original purchase. They buy a whole bunch of them, and then they figure out a way to make the manufacturing process cheaper, and the end product ends up being another product that's a little bit cheaper to you, but it was significantly cheaper to them, so they maximize profit that way. It's not anything new. You can easily look this up. You can easily look on any of the IR statements that Nintendo has had, and they specifically talk about how when they make cheaper models, they make increased yield and increased profits. This is not like it's something that somebody's making up. And I know later on she tries to say, well, nobody knows. You can just go look at their pages. They're a publicly held company because they have investors to report to. So they have investor reports that tell you exactly what they're doing as a business. If you want to know, read up on it. Just go on the stock exchange or whatever you need to do, and you can find all these reports on what they're doing. They're a public company. Everything they're doing is pretty public. There's no secret sauce to this.
I just don't understand that. For example, I love my Switch, but I know it needs more power because the games, while the games on it do run really good, some don't, and it needs a proper upgrade, not a downgrade.
Okay, and then so we get to this part where we talk about, I know the Switch needs better hardware. And the only evidence you have is some games run good and some games don't. You're going to have to need some examples, some technical information of some type to come to that type of conclusion. You can't just look at the end result and then assume what happened in between. The cause doesn't always match the effect, because there are many causes for the effect that you're seeing. And the funniest thing is, I never see anybody complain about a console A or console A or B or a PC and then say, man, these games run like crap. I really wish the developer would do a better job optimizing for my platform other than what they did for the lead SKU so my game could run better. It's almost like nobody ever even takes that into account that could be a case. A lot of these Switch ports are literally 1 year or less projects that are thrown together on a cart, in most cases not even a cart because they couldn't afford the carts, which lets you know how big the project size is here and how much money they have for this project to port the Switch. You're talking about people that at one point never had Nintendo development kits at all for any of their previous platforms, and now they see Switch, selling like hotcakes and they want a piece of that magic pie. So they're not going to go out and just say, you know what, our Witcher 3 developers, we're going to take all of the A team for CD Projekt Red that made the PC version of Witcher 3. We're going to take all those developers and then make them make a version all over again just for Switch and make sure it's catered just for Switch, and all the issues and little glitches and all the little nuances of that system that make everything run perfectly for that system, we're going to do that. No, they paid a port house to go ahead and put it over there, and we'll just see how that goes. Obviously, there are going to be things they're going to have to do because they're not recreating the game from scratch to make it work on Switch. They're porting the code. Nobody ever talks about this. The only thing they do is they immediately assume that it's the hardware. You gotta stop treating consoles like they're PCs. PCs run games despite having an OS and other things running in the background. They literally brute force their games. Consoles aren't like that. They were made specifically because they have a minimized OS, if any, and they have very little system tasks in the background, if any at all, so the focus is playing a game. Taking a game that was designed for PC with all the hooks and handles, and in some cases batch scripts, believe it or not, in some games that call other things because the original code was broken, that stuff doesn't translate well over to a console, and you're going to end up with issues like timing being off in the CPU and things of that nature. So yeah, just assuming that it's just the hardware as a user and layman on your end, because all you see is, it's going kind of slow, so it's the hardware's fault. Well, not always the case. That's just always my pet peeve. People always go to that, but it's usually because they don't really understand the tech that's going on behind it. And I get it. This is more of a fan channel, and she just talks about games and things she likes, and those are her opinions. That's fine, well and good. But if you're gonna have those opinions, like, have a reason. I would say a logical reason why you got to that conclusion. Just looking at games is not. That's not enough evidence.
We all know how Xenoblade Chronicles runs on the 3DS. It's bad. And that's why I feel like most games are going to be reduced to on the Switch Mini.
Wait, real quick. Xenoblade Chronicles on the 3DS is only on the new Nintendo 3DS. Specifically because the original 3DS didn't have the CPU ump or the memory clock frequency to run that game properly. And even then, yes, it is running it a little bit slower than the Wii did because the 3DS runs off a battery and the Wii did not. So obviously you can clock things a little bit higher on Wii and not have to worry about heat versus the 3DS, which doesn't have a fan. What I don't understand here is why we're even talking about that, because the Xenoblade Chronicles did not run on any lesser version of 3DS. It only ran on the higher end version. So if anything, this would be a case of a Switch Pro not being a good idea. Yeah, because Xenoblade Chronicles doesn't run on a 2DS at all, and that is the cheapest version of the 3DS.
A lot of you are coming at me thinking you know stuff. I don't know. You don't know. We can all agree on that, but it's all speculation at this point. The whole thing with the Switch, it's already factually underpowered. That's just like the topic I want to bring home. I don't get why people want a more underpowered console. I wouldn't buy it. I would just save up for the actual console because I know the games are not even gonna work the way they're supposed to work. And okay, they want to save money, but at what cost? And I'm not a rich person. I can't go to a store and buy Switches. So I'm not coming at this from a snobbish perspective because I don't make money like that. In the end, it's going to be like the worst thing because now we have a miniature version, a regular version, and then we're going to have to make games to suit both. And at the end of the day, it's still underpowered. There's still stuff missing.
Okay, so here we're talking about underpowered. Underpowered compared to what? Now, this in the being the ninth generation, considering Nintendo Switch is the successor to Wii U, we're talking about a system that does what the Wii U could do at a fraction of the wattage, and then some. We're talking about a system with a CPU at 1 gigahertz that matches what the PS4 does at 2 gigahertz. What do we mean by power at this point? Oh, we're talking about what we think we see in games that kind of attributes to what the quote unquote perceived performance is of the hardware based on, I don't know, raw speculation numbers that were thrown around during the launch of all this hardware, right? Because what else would you go by? That and Digital Foundry, I guess, because people just take them as gospel a lot of the time for everything that they say. And yeah, it took them a long time to start coming up with the way that they arrive at a lot of their numbers. But I digress. If you're not even knowledgeable about this and how you can just say, I know for a fact this is underpowered, that's probably not anything that you should probably take pride in. I know that, you know, people, the general consensus is, hey, the Switch is underpowered because it can't do this and can't do that. And then, but when you look on paper or you start looking at some of the actual realistic specifications for this stuff, and you're like, seems the CPU is actually more capable. Obviously, the GPU wouldn't, because we're talking about wattage here. And if you're going to have something at 11 watts, you can't have a lot of shaders in there. You can't have a high clock. So obviously, as far as teraflops on the GPU side, it's going to be a little bit slower. But on the CPU side, it's actually higher. So what which one do you want to pick? Which one do you want to call weak or anemic at this point? Because I guess saying that the PS4 has a weak CPU compared to Switch is probably not a popular thing to say, but it's true. So which I guess in this case, if you're saying that you don't want yet underpowered hardware, you already bought Switch at $300. And if you consider that underpowered, why did you purchase it? I'll answer for you. The games. And the person, because nobody's talking about the case, the edge case where somebody buys a Switch and then buys a Switch Mini, because that's rare. We're talking about an individual that has not bought a Switch yet and wants to play Switch games. And if the Switch Mini is any amount of dollars cheaper than the original Switch, and they can still play those games on it, regardless of the performance, we're talking about moms here at Christmas time. They're going to buy that one. They're going to buy the cheapest one, and then they're going to get the games or whatever after the fact. That's pretty much is what's going to happen here. It's happened with all the other cheaper hardware that Nintendo has sold since the beginning. Since the beginning, they've been doing this. So, yes, we get it. Your edge case, your opinion, and your take is you wouldn't buy this. That doesn't mean other people won't. That's exactly why them doing this, if they do, at this point, it's still a rumor, of course. If they do this, which is, in my opinion, likely, because they, instead of them making a pro version, they're going to take what they already have and then make it affordable. People are going to buy that because it's the cheaper option. Nintendo knows they're going to do this, so they're going to make that cheaper version cheaper to them on their end as well. So for every one sold, they make even more profit than the original Switch. It's just business. And like I said before, you went ahead and alluded to people not knowing what's going on. This is readily available information on Nintendo's investor relations portal. All you have to do is go there, go to their IR statements on their CodeJP page, and then you can read them. They're in English. You can read them. And they tell you exactly how they made profit on the 2DS and how they made profit on the various iterations of the 3DS. And of course, Wii U. And then Switch.
And Nobody wins in that scenario except for the somebody who wants to take an extra $50 off a Switch, which in my case, just buy the regular Switch.
So I'll leave my closing statements here. Um, this entire situation is stemming from, I guess, going on years now of developing rumors, if you will, of a Switch Mini and a Switch Pro. Switch Pro for a lot longer, and it is yet to be even acknowledged by Nintendo, which is hilarious to me because we all knew this was the case for the longest time. Um, Even though some people hang their hat on that, it's not here. And while the Mini is just as much of vaporware at this point right now, with regards to solid information, it is far more likely that would be the case because we're talking the Nintendo Switch hitting mass appeal, and we're talking continuing to keep the sales trends and the sales records that it's breaking, getting even higher numbers than that in the following fiscal years that they're going to be having. So how do you take a console that is already popular at $300 and then make it even more popular and make it critical mass like Wii was? You make it cheaper. That's literally what you do. Even the Wii did this, and they sold an $88 version, specifically exclusive to Walmart. This isn't anything that Nintendo hasn't done with previous hardware. I can only think the only system that never got a price drop was Wii U, and even it got one. It was down to $300 from $350, but it got one. But there was no weaker model or a newer model that saved them money on parts and costs and stuff like that. So it's the exception to the rule. Everything else Nintendo has iterated on in some way, shape, or form to save money on their end, whether it's removing backwards compatibility, removing the digital connector on the back of systems like GameCube. That stuff is what Nintendo does going forward. They have massive warehouses where they keep all these parts. They have large production facilities that they partner with to make this hardware, and they find the cheapest cost and the cheapest bid on how to create them. So, and when it's sold to you, it's going to be sold to you at a cheaper cost. So there's a benefit to you, and there's a benefit to them, and it drives not only the unit sales number higher, with a newer SKU that's cheaper, it also drives the potential for potential game sales. So their game sales will be higher because there'll be more platforms and a higher user base, which is what they need. So I wouldn't count that out, and I wouldn't. While going the pro route and then say maybe discounting the current Switch model right now to be the Switch Mini, if you will, while that is another good way to go about it, you're still talking about brand new hardware that Nintendo will have to pay for. So they're not really making money on that because the R&D that they were using to make the Switch Pro, they're losing any money that they would gain by making the Switch cheaper and then trying to sell it to you. Or they may still be eating the original cost of selling the original Switch at $300, and if they were producing them at $200 a piece or $100 a piece and then selling them to you at at cost or what have you, or a little above at cost, then what's going to happen when they're selling it to you for $100 less? They're selling them at a loss. So, and they have a brand new hardware out there that are also selling at a loss or close to a loss. It doesn't make sense from the business side versus selling cheaper hardware that immediately gets them profit right off the bat. And that means that the original Switch that's currently out right now and the Switch Mini, both of those SKUs will be out there and they both will be sold at a profit. I mean, if you look at it and you look at it just on the numbers and just on price, it's a no-brainer at this point. Also, it's what Nintendo has continued to do for the longest time. That's my case. That's my take on it, only because it's what they've been doing. Obviously, yes, there's every opportunity that a Switch Pro could come out and they eat all the costs, and the current Switch right now would be the Switch Mini, and they eat all the cost on that. Nintendo could afford to do it. They could afford the Wii U failing multiple times and still have money in the bank. So yes, That's not likely though. Nintendo is a very conservative company and they love to keep profit as much as they can. In the situation where we're in a situation right now where this company has been around for 100 plus years and they've only recorded a couple of losses during the Wii U cycle. That's it. So they're not going forward going to continue to take losses. That just isn't what they do. They do R&D on new hardware, and that's the closest they'll get to having a full profit, not a profit loss, but lack of profit for an entire fiscal year. It just isn't what they do. They profit every single year. So I don't know. It, like she said in her video, tell me what you think in the comments if you want to continue the conversation. Should there be a Switch Pro or should there be a Switch Mini? I mean, I see no reason why there can't be all three. But if we're gonna go for one, the Mini is the obvious choice to me because of money, and I know Nintendo likes to keep money. If you think the Pro is more, then go ahead and sound off, do your reaction video, whatever you want to do, and the same for the Mini, and we'll go from there. But as I always say, do you play games to have fun or to impress other people? Also, check out her channel too. It's actually pretty good. MandyLeePlays. Go ahead and look at it on YouTube and check her out. Give it a like or whatnot. All right, guys. Out.
Shall we? Let's go.